Constantinople, Ottoman Empire, 1892. Hadiya Levonian stood at the window of her family's estate overlooking the Bosphorus, watching ships traverse the strait that divided Europe from Asia. Her fingers trembled as she reread the letter her father had handed her that morning. "The arrangements have been finalized," he had announced with undisguised triumph. "You will marry Kemal Pasha's son next month. The family's position will be secured." Now alone, Hadiya crumpled the letter in her fist. The Pashas were powerful allies for her Armenian merchant family, a rare opportunity in the increasingly precarious Ottoman climate. But Kemal Pasha's son was known for his cruelty, his multiple wives, and his disdain for Christians, even those like Hadiya who had mastered Turkish customs through her privileged upbringing. "Miss," her maid Sophia whispered from the doorway. "Your mother requests your presence for the fitting." Hadiya smoothed her skirts and followed. The wedding preparations were already underway, a gown being tailored, jewels selected, guests invited. Each step felt like a march toward imprisonment. That night, after everyone had retired, Hadiya slipped from her bed, retrieved the small pouch of coins and jewelry she had hidden beneath a floorboard, and changed into her simplest dress. She pinned her long dark hair under a modest head covering and took only what she could carry, including her grandmother's journal containing pressed flowers from the old country. "Forgive me, father," she whispered, leaving behind a note. "I cannot marry where there is no hope of respect or love." She slipped through the servants' entrance and into the Constantinople night. The city's fragrant air carried the mingled scents of the sea, spices, and night-blooming jasmine. Hadiya had no destination except away, perhaps to her cousin's home in Smyrna, or even beyond to Athens where distant relatives might shelter her. Dawn found her exhausted and frightened at the docks, seeking passage on any departing vessel. But as the sun rose, she spotted her father's business associate among the crowd. If he saw her, all would be lost. Panicking, Hadiya turned and fled through the awakening city, winding through narrow streets until she reached the outer walls of Topkapi Palace. She paused, breathless, beside the ornate gates where guards stood watch. A cart of flowers was entering, deliveries for the palace gardens. Without thinking, Hadiya slipped alongside it, hidden partially by its fragrant cargo, and passed through the gates into the forbidden world of the imperial residence. Once inside, she broke away, moving quickly down a path lined with cypress trees. She had no plan now except to hide until nightfall, then perhaps find another way out. The enormity of her situation began to overwhelm her. She had not only fled an arranged marriage but had illegally entered the Sultan's palace grounds, a crime punishable by imprisonment or worse. The gardens opened before her, more magnificent than she had imagined, formal beds of tulips, roses from Damascus, fountains singing their eternal songs. Hadiya moved deeper into their sanctuary, finally finding a secluded pavilion partially hidden by weeping willows. She slipped inside and collapsed onto a bench, finally allowing her tears to flow. "Who disturbs my morning solitude?" a man's voice suddenly asked in perfect Turkish. Hadiya gasped, rising to her feet. In the doorway stood a tall figure silhouetted against the morning light, a young man dressed not in the expected palace finery but in the simple uniform of the imperial gardeners. His expression was more curious than angry. "Forgive me," Hadiya stammered in Turkish, bowing her head. "I am lost." The man studied her for a moment. "You are not a palace servant," he observed, stepping closer. "Yet you are here among the Sultan's private gardens before the court has even risen." "Please," Hadiya whispered, "I mean no harm. I only need to rest, then I will leave." He regarded her thoughtfully, and in the filtered light, she could see he was perhaps a few years older than her 20 years, with eyes the color of amber and a serious mouth that suggested he smiled rarely. "I am Thomas Inglehart," he said in accented but perfect Armenian, surprising her completely. "Head botanical curator to His Imperial Majesty." Hadiya stared at him, shocked to hear her mother tongue from this stranger. "You speak Armenian?" "Among other languages. Essential for my work." He gestured to the gardens beyond. "Plants, like people, come from many lands." He switched back to Turkish. "Now, perhaps you might explain your presence here before I am obliged to call the guards." Something in his measured tone gave Hadiya courage. My name is Hadiya Levonian. I have fled my family home to escape a marriage arrangement. Thomas Inglehart's expression remained neutral. And you chose the imperial palace as your sanctuary? Most would consider that exchanging one danger for a greater one. It wasn't a choice, she admitted. I was being pursued. He considered this, then glanced at the sun climbing higher in the sky. The palace will soon be awake. You cannot remain here. He hesitated, then added, there is a small gardener's cottage near the outer wall where I store seeds and specimens. You may hide there today. When night falls, I will help you leave safely. Relief washed over Hadiya. Why would you help me? A shadow crossed his face. Let us say I understand something of being caught between worlds. He gestured for her to follow. Come quickly, before others arrive. The cottage was small but orderly, filled with dried plants, bottles of seeds, and botanical journals. Thomas pointed to a back room. Remain there. I will return with food when I can. Left alone, Hadiya examined her surroundings. The walls were covered with detailed botanical drawings, and journals filled with elegant handwriting lined the shelves. One book lay open on the desk, a collection of pressed flowers with detailed notes in multiple languages. She recognized her grandmother's favorite flower, the Armenian forget-me-not, carefully preserved alongside its scientific description. Hours passed before Thomas returned with bread, cheese, and water. The palace is in an unusual state today, he reported. The Sultan's nephew, Prince Mehmed, has returned unexpectedly from his European tour. The entire court is preoccupied with the reception. Is that good for me? Hadiya asked. It means fewer eyes watching the gardens, Thomas replied. But it also means more activity near the gates. He glanced at her simple dress. You'll need different attire to leave unnoticed. As they spoke, a palace bell rang in the distance. Thomas frowned. I must attend to my duties. The prince often visits the gardens after traveling. I will return by sunset. After he left, Hadiya explored the cottage more thoroughly, finding comfort in the ordered collection of botanical treasures. One journal caught her attention, written in English with sketches of plants from around the world. The inscription read, "To my son Thomas, may you find roots where your heart leads. Your loving father, William Inglehart, Royal Botanical Gardens, Kew." She realized Thomas was not Turkish at all, but English, somehow serving in the Ottoman court. The mystery of his presence intrigued her almost as much as her own predicament. When Thomas returned hours later, his expression was troubled. There are soldiers at all gates, he said. They're searching for someone, a young Armenian woman who disappeared before her marriage to Kemal Pasha's son. Hadiya's heart sank. My father must have connections even in the palace. The Sultan values his relationship with Kemal Pasha, Thomas explained. Your disappearance has become a diplomatic matter. He hesitated. You cannot leave tonight. It's too dangerous. Then I brought trouble to you as well, Hadiya whispered. Thomas arranged a simple pallet in the back room. Rest. Tomorrow we will think of another solution. That night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the palace gardens, Hadiya wondered about the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this place, and to this unusual Englishman who spoke her language and kept the Sultan's gardens. For 3 days, Hadiya remained hidden in the cottage while Thomas brought food and news. She learned that her father had indeed offered a reward for information about her whereabouts, and that Kemal Pasha's son was personally leading searches throughout the city. On the 4th morning, Thomas arrived with a bundle of clothing. Put these on, he instructed. They're the garments of a palace gardener's assistant. If anyone asks, you are a mute girl from the provinces, brought to help with the spring planting. You're keeping me here? Hadiya asked, surprised. Only until the search diminishes, Thomas explained. And it would be safer if you could move about the gardens rather than remain confined. But you must be careful, speak to no one, keep your head down, and stay close to me. Disguised in the simple gardener's clothes, Hadiya followed Thomas through the magnificent gardens. He worked methodically, checking plants, instructing other gardeners, making notes in a small journal. Occasionally, he would explain a rare specimen to her in a low voice, his knowledge and passion evident. These roses came from Persia, he told her, touching a deep crimson bloom. They say the Sultan's grandmother brought the first cuttings herself, hidden in the hem of her dress. By midday, they had reached a secluded section near the harem gardens, separated by high walls from the rest of the palace grounds. Thomas knelt to examine a struggling orange tree. "This one needs more protection from the sea winds," he murmured, then froze as voices approached. "The gardens have improved greatly under the Englishman's care," a cultured voice observed in Turkish. "Indeed, Your Highness," another replied. "The Sultan is most pleased." Thomas immediately stood and bowed deeply. Hadiya followed suit, keeping her eyes lowered as a small group rounded the path. At their center walked a young man in European clothing with a Turkish fez. Prince murmured, she realized. "Ah, Inglehart," the prince said, switching to perfect English. "I was hoping to find you. Oxford sends its regards." "You honor me, Your Highness," Thomas replied in English, his accent now distinctly British. "I trust your European tour was illuminating." Educational in unexpected ways, the prince smiled, then noticed Hadiya. "A new assistant?" "Yes, Your Highness." "From Bursa?" "Skilled with delicate blooms but, unfortunately, unable to speak." The prince studied Hadiya for a moment. She kept her eyes downcast, heart hammering. "Ensure she attends the night blooming Sirius this evening," the prince instructed. "I understand it will flower tonight, and I wish to show my guests." "Of course, Your Highness." After the prince departed, Thomas let out a breath. "That was fortunate. Prince Murnd is more progressive than most of the royal family. Still, we must be cautious." That evening, Thomas brought Hadiya to a secluded greenhouse where a rare cactus had produced a single spectacular blossom that would live for only one night. They prepared the space for the prince's visit, lighting small lanterns that cast a golden glow over the miraculous flower. "It journeys across oceans and waits years to bloom for just these few hours," Thomas explained, his voice softening with wonder. "Some beauty is worth the wait." As they worked, Hadiya asked the question that had been lingering. "How does an Englishman become the Ottoman Sultan's gardener?" Thomas was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "My father was a botanist at Kew Gardens in London. He was invited to collect specimens in Anatolia when I was 12. I accompanied him and learned Turkish and other local languages." His hands moved gently among the plants as he spoke. "When my father died of fever in Istanbul, I was 17 and alone. The Sultan's previous head gardener had been impressed with my father's work and offered me an apprenticeship." "You never returned to England?" "There was nothing to return to," he said simply. "My mother had died years before. Here, at least, I had purpose." He glanced at her. "The gardens became my home." Before Hadiya could respond, voices approached. Thomas quickly directed her to tend the lanterns while he greeted the prince and his entourage. She kept her face averted as they exclaimed over the magnificent bloom, but she couldn't help noticing how differently Thomas carried himself among the nobility, formal, deferential, yet somehow maintaining his dignity. Later that night, after returning to the cottage, Thomas seemed troubled. "The prince mentioned the search for the missing Armenian bride," he told Hadiya. "It seems your fiancé has expanded the search to other cities, believing you have fled Constantinople." "Then perhaps it's safer for me to remain hidden here longer," Hadiya suggested. Thomas nodded. "But we must plan carefully. You cannot live indefinitely as a mute gardener's assistant." Over the following weeks, Hadiya settled into a strange new routine. By day, she worked alongside Thomas in the gardens, learning the names and needs of countless plants. By night, she returned to the cottage where they would often sit in companionable silence, Thomas working on his botanical journals, Hadiya reading books he provided or writing in a journal he had given her. Gradually, Thomas revealed more of himself. He had traveled throughout the empire collecting specimens, spoke 7 languages, and had developed new methods for cultivating European plants in the Ottoman climate. Despite his position of respect within the palace, he remained an outsider, neither fully accepted by the Turks nor connected to his English roots. "Perhaps that's why I find comfort in plants," he told her one evening. "They don't concern themselves with a man's origins, only with his care." Hadiya, in turn, shared stories of her childhood in the Armenian quarter, her education at a French missionary school, and her love of poetry. She found herself speaking more freely with Thomas than she ever had with anyone. "I never objected to marriage itself," she explained. "Only to being traded like one of your specimens, valued for appearance rather than substance." Spring deepened into summer, and with it, Hadiya's feelings for the reserved Englishman grew. She noticed how his serious expression would soften when discovering a new bloom, how his hands, strong from years of garden work, could arrange delicate flowers with gentle precision. Most of all, she valued their conversations, exchanges between equals despite their different backgrounds. One warm evening, as they worked late deadheading roses, Thomas suddenly asked, "Do you regret it? Leaving your family?" Hadiya considered the question carefully. "I regret causing them pain. But no, I don't regret choosing my own path, however uncertain." Thomas nodded, then said quietly, "Your father came to the palace today." Hadiya froze. "He was here? Did he see me?" "No. He was meeting with court officials about his shipping business." Thomas hesitated. "I overheard him speaking. He sounded broken. He believes you may have drowned trying to leave the city." The thought of her father's grief struck Hadiya like a physical blow. "I never meant to hurt him," she whispered. "I only wanted to avoid a lifetime of misery." "Perhaps there's a way to let him know you're safe without revealing your location," Thomas suggested. The next day, Thomas returned from his duties with news. "I've arranged for a letter to be delivered to your father from Smyrna. It will say only that you are safe and well, but cannot return." Tears filled Hadiya's eyes. "Thank you." Thomas looked away, seemingly uncomfortable with her emotion. "I've also heard that Kemal Pasha's son has become engaged to another woman. Your disappearance apparently wounded his pride, but not for long." Relief washed over Hadiya, followed quickly by a new anxiety. If there was no longer a search for her, there was no reason to remain hidden in the palace. The thought of leaving Thomas and the sanctuary of the gardens filled her with unexpected sadness. That evening, a summer storm broke over Constantinople. Thunder shook the small cottage, and rain pounded against the windows. Thomas and Hadiya sat before a small brazier, the air between them charged with unspoken thoughts. "I should be able to arrange passage for you to Smyrna next week," Thomas finally said, his voice carefully neutral. "Your father's business partner has returned to Trebizond. The danger has passed." Hadiya stared at the glowing coals. "Yes, I suppose it has." A silence stretched between them, broken only by the rain and distant thunder. "These past months," Thomas began, then stopped. He rarely struggled for words. "These past months have been—" "Yes," Hadiya agreed softly, understanding what he couldn't say. Thomas stood abruptly and moved to the window. "You should return to your life, Hadiya. You're educated, from a good family. Once away from Constantinople, you could make a respectable match of your own choosing." "Is that what you want for me?" she asked, joining him at the window. "What I want?" He turned to her, his usual composure slipping. "What I want is impossible. I am a man without country or fortune, bound to service in a foreign court. You deserve more than a gardener's cottage and a life of secrecy." Hadiya placed her hand over his. "What if I've found, in this cottage and these gardens, something I never had before? Not luxury or status, but understanding. Respect." Perhaps even a tremendous crash of thunder interrupted her words, and the cottage door burst open. Prince Mern stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his European coat. "Inglehart, you must—" He stopped, seeing Hadiya not in gardener's clothes but in a simple dress, her hair uncovered, clearly not a mute servant girl. His eyes widened with recognition. "You're the Armenian merchant's daughter. The one everyone is searching for." Thomas stepped forward. Your Highness, I can explain. I should hope so, the prince said, closing the door behind him. You've hidden a fugitive in the Imperial Palace. That's a serious offense, even for you. The fault is mine alone, Hadiya said, stepping forward. Mr. Inglehart showed me mercy when I had nowhere else to turn. The prince removed his wet coat and hung it near the brazier. I suspected something unusual when I saw you in the garden that day. No mute servant looks at plants with such educated interest. He turned to Thomas. How long has she been here? Nearly 3 months, Your Highness. The prince raised his eyebrows. Impressive. And what were you planning to do with her? I was arranging her safe passage to Smyrna next week. Prince Murmd studied them both for a long moment. I came to warn you that the storm has damaged the Ottoman tulip collection. But it seems I've discovered a more delicate matter. He sat down, indicating they should do the same. Tell me the complete truth, both of you. Hadiya recounted her story, the arranged marriage, her flight, and her accidental entry into the palace gardens. Thomas explained how he had hidden her and their recent discovery that the search had diminished. The prince listened thoughtfully. A remarkable tale. And in these months together, I imagine you've grown fond of one another. Neither Thomas nor Hadiya answered, but their silence was confirmation enough. I studied in England for 3 years, the prince said unexpectedly. I came to admire certain Western ideas about personal choice and the education of women. Ideas that are still controversial here. He looked at Hadiya. Your father is a respected merchant who has served the empire well. To have his daughter disappear without trace is a continuing embarrassment. What will you do with us? Thomas asked quietly. The prince considered. The Sultan values your work, Inglehart. The gardens have never been more magnificent. And you, he turned to Hadiya, are clearly educated and resourceful. He stood, decision made. Here is what will happen. Miss Levonian will be given a position as transcriber and translator in the palace library. Her father will be discreetly informed that she is alive and under imperial protection, serving the court voluntarily. This will restore his dignity without forcing her return. Hadiya stared at the prince in disbelief. You would do this for a stranger? For the empire, he corrected. We lose too many talented minds to outdated traditions. He picked up his coat. As for your living arrangements, that is not my concern. But I suggest more discretion. After the prince left, Thomas and Hadiya sat in stunned silence. It seems impossible, Thomas finally said. What part? Hadiya asked. That I'm no longer hiding? That I might see my father again? Or that we need not be separated? Thomas took her hands in his. All of it. I never dared hope. Nor I, Hadiya whispered. When I fled that night, I was running from something, not toward anything. I couldn't have imagined finding sanctuary, purpose, and you. Thomas touched her face gently. The night we met, you said you couldn't marry where there was no hope of respect or love. I can offer respect in abundance, but as for love... Yes? Hadiya prompted softly. I have loved you since you wept in the pavilion that first morning, Thomas admitted. But I never thought I could honorably act on it. In answer, Hadiya leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, a first kiss that held the promise of many more. 1 year later, in a small ceremony in the same pavilion where they had first met, Thomas and Hadiya were married. Prince Murmd himself gave permission, and Hadiya's father, initially furious but gradually reconciled through carefully exchanged letters, finally agreed to attend. The gardens were in full bloom around them as Thomas took Hadiya's hands in his. From different worlds, we have created our own, he said, his voice steady with conviction. Like your most carefully tended garden, Hadiya replied, with roots deep enough to weather any storm. As they spoke their vows beneath flowering branches, neither could have predicted how their union would later influence the prince's progressive reforms, nor how their botanical work would preserve species that might otherwise have been lost to time. They knew only that in finding each other, they had discovered something as rare and precious as the night-blooming cereus, a love that had waited for the perfect moment to flower in the most unexpected of places.